Good morning, Europe. Welcome to the program. Our top stories for you this hour: a good start or a disgrace? Donald Trump draws sharp rebuke back home after chummy summit with Vladimir Putin, while Russians are pleased. And over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
Trump allies on the attack as the president's supporters lay into him for that meeting with Vladimir Putin.
Caving in. Theresa May is accused of bowing to hardline Brexiteers after agreeing to changes in a key customs bill to get it through Parliament. Seeking justice. Nicaraguans take to the streets of the capital to demand justice for the victims of a violent crackdown on protests against the president. And heroes welcome. The French team arrive home to wild cheers and street celebrations after bringing World Cup glory to France. Thank you for starting your morning with us. Our top story this hour: reaction has been scathing in both Europe and Washington after a highly unusual press conference at the U.S.-Russia summit in Helsinki. Well, in it, U.S. President Donald Trump urged that, quote, diplomacy and engagement are preferable to conflict and hostility, end quote. But then he made the highly undiplomatic move of dismissing the findings of his own intelligence agencies, choosing instead to publicly accept his counterpart Vladimir Putin's denials of Russian involvement in the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign. Evelyn Laverick has the story.
U.S. President Donald Trump hailed his summit with Russia's Vladimir Putin as a positive turning point. But back home, the U.S. leader is being slammed for casting doubt over his own intelligence service and accepting Putin's denial of meddling in the 2016 presidential election. And he didn't demand the extradition of 12 Russian spies accused of hacking Democratic Party computers.
I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. And what he did is an incredible offer. He offered to have the people working on the case come and work with their investigators with respect to the 12 people.
Within hours came a rebuke from Trump's Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, who said he'd been clear in assessments of Russian meddling and their pervasive efforts to undermine U.S. democracy. The leaders had spent 2 hours of one-to-one talks alone with only their translators, something which critics have described as reckless without advisers. Afterwards, President Putin made the surprise statement that their views, while not overlapping all the time, had found quite a few areas of common interest. But some on Capitol Hill accused Trump of being too friendly with Putin, wanting him to have taken Russia to task on issues such as its role in Syria and the annexation of Crimea. Both Democrats and Republicans have warned Trump that Russia is no friend, and former CIA Director John Brennan labelled Trump's actions treasonable. Both leaders now return home to different welcomes. Putin's been seen as an equal to Trump on the international stage, while Trump's facing a wave of condemnation and will face members of Congress later today. Evelyn Laverick, Euronews.
Unpatriotic and a disgrace. That's what allies of President Trump are talking about at the Helsinki summit. That's what they're saying. Now let's head over to the Cube with Alex with these extraordinary reactions. Alex?
Good morning, Tessa. This, the image projected to the world. Now, after a week of going through Europe and calling traditional allies foes, many of Trump's supporters were uncomfortable about the seeming closeness of the relationship and the warmth of language from Donald Trump towards Vladimir Putin, Russia, the historic opponents of America on the world stage. The most senior Republican in Congress, Republicans obviously being the party of Donald Trump, he gave a statement, Paul Ryan, in which he said the president must not confuse Russia for an ally and that there is no moral equivalence between the United States and Russia, which remains hostile to our most basic values and ideals. This is rare for Paul Ryan. Just a week before making this statement, he had said Americans shouldn't criticize Donald Trump when he's overseas engaged in diplomacy. Well, quite a turnaround after that Helsinki summit. Now, someone also from the Republican Party, but fair to say a medium-time critic of Donald Trump, John McCain, former presidential candidate, saying that the press conference was one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president in memory. In a full statement, he goes on to lambast Donald Trump, his character, the way he conducted himself on the stage. This from within the Republican Party. Now, Fox and Friends is Donald Trump's favourite news show. Not yet Good Morning Europe, but we'll see. But Fox and Friends, the weekend host, Abby Huntsman, tweeting her criticism of him. A lot of Fox News, traditionally supportive, tweeting criticism of Donald Trump. Abby Huntsman saying no negotiation is worth throwing your country and your people under the bus. So what about here in Europe? Yes, that at home it clearly went down badly, even among his support base. But here in Europe, Carl Bildt, a key European foreign policy figure, describing it as remarkable that as today we are on the 4th anniversary of the awful MH17 incident where nearly 300 people were killed after the aircraft was shot down in Ukraine, that there was no mention, null, zero, nada, nothing of the Ukrainian conflict, of the issues over Crimea and of that air disaster. Also, it's worth saying, though, Donald Trump, seemingly anticipating criticism, seemingly perhaps trying to justify his remarks, did then tweet saying that, yes, he has great confidence in his intelligence agencies, who in the press conference he seemed to disregard their advice in favour of the denials of Vladimir Putin. But he says, no, I have great confidence in them. But what I'm trying to do is build a better relationship between the world's two strongest nuclear powers. And that is the president's take on all this. What is your take? You can let us know your thoughts using #TheCube.
All those reactions came pouring in after the press conference yesterday. Thanks for that, Alex and the Cube team. And as we have seen, reaction in the U.S. has been strong after Trump seemingly dismissed the findings of his own intelligence agencies, and he openly backed Putin. And for more on the Russian reaction, our correspondent Galina Polonskaya joins me now live from Helsinki. Galina, this is being seen as a positive for Vladimir Putin. Is it being viewed as a victory, a success for him?
Good morning, Sarah. Well, actually, Kremlin and the Russian Ministry of Foreign Ministry took the results of the negotiations which took place at this palace right behind me with a mixture of surprise and happiness. Right after the press conference, Vladimir Putin gave an interview to a state news agency TASS, saying that he was surprised by the outcome of the meeting. He had hoped that it was going to be just a warm-up talks, and according to Vladimir Putin, the negotiations were very constructive and brought real concrete results. So I was there at this press conference, standing just steps away from both leaders and from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And I saw that he was extremely happy. He was smiling and, sending this happiness out into the press room. And after the press conference, he also gave an interview to another news agency, saying that the results of the meeting were super and even better than super, which leaves us a lot of space for imagination, as probably we'll never know what was concretely discussed behind the closed doors by two presidents yesterday for 2 hours. So the Russian parliament named this meeting a historical one and said that it is a ground for the future bilateral work. Russian press is also applauding the success. One of the famous Russian newspapers, Kommersant, named the meeting a political World Cup where with no winners, because both of the teams were equally strong, and the paper underlined that it is wrong to even question who won yesterday. Other papers say that Vladimir Putin showed Donald Trump what real democracy is. But, well, what is the next step in this new era of the relationship? Maybe a new state visit. We'll see this autumn.
All right, thank
Sarah?
you, Galina Polonskaya, for bringing us the Russian side of the story. Thank you. Well, as relations were warming in Helsinki, back in Washington, news broke that a 29-year-old Russian woman had been arrested and charged with conspiracy. Well, the U.S. Justice Department says Maria Butina stands accused of acting as an agent of the Russian government while developing ties with American citizens and infiltrating political groups. Her lawyer maintains her innocence and says she is cooperating with U.S. authorities. Well, the arrest is not being overseen by Special Counsel Robert Mueller's office as part of its its investigation into alleged collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia during the last U.S. presidential election campaign. Well, let's head to the UK now, where Prime Minister Theresa May has been accused of caving in to hardline Brexiteers by accepting changes on her EU customs bill. And that's in order to get them through Parliament. And joining us live from London to tell us what this all means is Vincent McAviney. Vincent, first of all, can you tell us what the changes that she accepted were?
Good morning, Tessa. Well, these are some quite technical changes to the Prime Minister's so-called Chequers plans. Now, in her vision of Brexit, the UK would collect tariffs for the EU for goods that are heading there to keep the borders as frictionless as possible. But this First Amendment means that the UK won't collect any taxes for the EU unless the EU does the same for the UK. That passed by just 3 votes. The Second Amendment also takes the UK out of the EU's VAT scheme. That passed by 11 votes. So some technical changes, but things that the Brexiteers want in there to make sure that this is a harder Brexit than the Prime Minister is planning. And really, this issue of the EU, the fault line of the Conservative Party for the last 3 or 4 decades, is really turning into a bit of a chasm now between the party, as those vote margins show. The Prime Minister on a bit of a rope bridge between the two sides of her party, desperately trying to hang on to it and to her Chequers plans.
Yeah, indeed. So those hardline Brexiteers must be happy, but of course there are some who aren't. Where does this leave the government now?
Well, last night we had another resignation, the 10th member of the government to go. That was Guto Beb, a defence minister. And that's part of this, we believe, 100-strong WhatsApp group that is doing a coordinated drip attack on the Prime Minister's plans. We also had the resignation speech of the former Brexit Secretary, David Davis. He held back on the Prime Minister but criticised the EU, saying their negotiators were slow and not very effective. Some return fire from him after they leaked that he was being lazy in the negotiations, but really all eyes still on Boris Johnson. He's expected to make his resignation speech in here tomorrow after the Prime Minister has her final PMQs. Now, the Prime Minister, really, number 10, quite beleaguered at the moment. They're trying to bring the end of the parliamentary term forward from next week to Thursday. And on the Remain side, she's also still facing criticism there. After Justine Greening, the former Education Secretary, called for a second referendum yesterday, the Prime Minister's spokesperson said no way on that one. Well, they said that before about a snap election, but then the Prime Minister went on holiday walking in Wales and decided to call one. She's got a holiday planned, we think, in the summer again in Switzerland, so who knows what she'll come up with over the summer break.
Indeed. Thank you for that update. Vincent McAviney there in London. Still to come on Good Morning Europe, hundreds of protesters took to the streets across Nicaragua after at least 10 people died over the weekend following a crackdown on protests against President Ortega. We'll hear from the government. And a hero's welcome for the French team. Our correspondent was at the parade in Paris. That's after a short break. Welcome back to Good Morning Europe. Your top story: President Trump is facing furious criticism after suggesting he trusts Russian President Vladimir Putin over his own intelligence services following a historic summit in Helsinki yesterday. Hundreds of people have taken to the streets of Nicaragua after more deadly violence from pro-government paramilitary forces. The latest spate of violence over the weekend saw 12 people killed, including a 10-year-old girl. Now, this brings the number killed since April to around 280. President Ortega has been condemned by the international community, and the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has demanded a political solution to the crisis. Well, the Nicaraguan Minister of National Policies is in Brussels. Our correspondent, Brian Carter, is live for us with the latest. Now, Brian, so the Minister for National Policies, he was in Brussels for a meeting with EU politicians. Will this crisis be on the agenda?
Probably, Tessa. They are here together for the EU CELAC meeting, which is a political dialogue that is held every 2 years. But of course, often domestic issues come onto the agenda. And that is the case, of course, where in Nicaragua, with the protests have been going on for 3 months between the pro-government forces and the anti-government demonstrators. It actually started when Daniel Ortega, the president of Nicaragua, planned to reduce the pension benefits in the country. Some people protested against that, and they were violently crushed by pro-government forces. Now, the images circulated, and they sparked outrage in the country, drawing more people into the streets. Now, the pension reform was eventually scrapped, but the demands of the protesters mushroomed into much more, into demands for democratic reforms and early elections, with Daniel Ortega saying that this is a coup attempt. But there's been a lot of violence and a lot of human rights violations. As you said, there's close to 300 people killed over the last 3 months, and the country is now littered with roadblocks and barricades everywhere, with each side really camping on its position. The EU's chief diplomat, Federica Mogherini, has said that, I quote, "the violence is unacceptable and that the differences can only be resolved through inclusive dialogue." Now, yesterday, Euronews reporter Anna Lazaro sat down with Paulo Quisqueli, who's, as you said, the Secretary of State for National Policies and who is the highest-ranking member of the Nicaraguan government here in Brussels, and she asked him if Daniel Ortega would consider stepping down before the end of his term in 2022. And here's his answer.
Esto no resolvería la cosa. ¿Sabe por qué?
This is a pro-coup position. Why would the president step down? Because somebody put up barricades in the street? This won't solve the situation. You know why? Because the pro-government Sandinistas also know how to put up barricades. So we are going to bring down governments just because somebody put up barricades? You will never have peace in Nicaragua. Look, Nicaragua is a polarized society. I like the position of the Vatican. It says that one side cannot impose its views on another in a society that is polarized. You need first an agreement. In the case of Nicaragua, we need an end to the violence, rebuild trust, build peace, which is more than just stopping violence. But above all, we need national reconciliation.
Necesitamos reconciliación nacional.
So, as I said before, the EU countries are meeting with the Foreign Affairs Minister of Latin America and Caribbean states. 61 countries coming together to talk about trade, about climate, about drug policy, about strengthening partnership. But as I said, the first policy, the first item on the agenda is trade. Now, trade between the two blocs has actually doubled over the last 10 years, and the EU has concluded several free trade agreements with countries like Chile, Peru, and Mexico. But they want to go further, and this comes, of course, at a time of rising tensions with the U.S., with the EU trying to really diversify its trading partners. But all you can expect from this meeting is a declaration. Behind the scenes, there will be more negotiations to see if we can strengthen partnerships and, of course, increase trade between the two blocs. Tessa?
All right, thanks for that. Brian Carter there in Brussels. Thanks. Now, 23 people have been injured after a sightseeing boat was hit by molten lava from an exploding volcano off of Hawaii's Big Island. It's the worst casualty rate resulting from the ongoing eruption of the Kilauea volcano so far. The 49-passenger seat vessel takes visitors to see lava plunging into the ocean from the volcano that's been erupting for some 2 months now. Thousands of workers will at Amazon warehouses in Germany strike today to demand better working conditions. They're joining colleagues in Spain and Poland in taking action that coincides with Amazon's Prime Day promotion. Unions are demanding labor contracts that guarantee healthy working conditions at the world's largest e-commerce company. And Portuguese footballer Cristiano Ronaldo has signed a €100 million deal to play with Juventus. The 33-year-old forward has joined the Italian champions on a 4-year contract. He said it was not a difficult decision to leave Real Madrid after 9 years, and he insisted that he is as ambitious as ever for sporting glory.
As I said before, the age is not important. I feel good. I feel motivated. Exciting, so I will try to do my best, like always, and I'm looking forward to start the league well and try to win every title.
And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, a hero's welcome for the French team. We'll hear from our correspondent who was at the parade in Paris. And over in the Cube.
4 years on and still no justice for the 298 people killed on MH17. We'll have the story after a short break.
Welcome back to Good Morning Europe. Thank you for joining us. Now, thousands of fans flocked to the Champs-Élysées in Paris as France's World Cup winning football team staged a victorious homecoming parade. Well, wrapped in French flags, supporters cheered them on as the young French team, filming the moment on their mobile phones, took part in an open-top bus parade. A country brought together following their 4-2 win over Croatia in Moscow on Sunday. Our correspondent Annelise Borges was there.
It was like the party never really ended. Early afternoon on Monday, and football fans were back on the Champs-Élysées, eager to get the best seats to spot their heroes. The most iconic avenue in Paris, filled with a mixture of disbelief and pride over a national team that represented the whole of France.
We still can't actually believe what's happened.
We weren't around for 98. We're happy we can experience this now. We're proud we will have things to tell our children.
I think it's one of the teams with the most diversity, the most people from different origins, and that is France. So it's a real symbol, and we're proud to be French.
The 30-degree heat didn't scare away the crowds, who gathered by the thousands to witness history being made. This second world title will continue to be celebrated in the days and weeks to come. And France's young, now successful champions hope to remain a symbol of what a country can do when they work together towards the same goal. Annelise Borges in Paris for Euronews.
Well, moments after the parade, French President Emmanuel Macron welcomed France's victorious team to the Élysée Palace. Macron and his wife Brigitte joined them for a garden party, which began with a chorus of soccer anthems on the steps of the palace. The squad were awarded the Légion d'honneur, France's highest distinction of merit for their services to the country. And joining me from the south of France is former MEP and author Daniel Cohn-Bendit. Thank you very much, Mr. Cohn-Bendit, for joining us. Now, the French football team and, of course, their World Cup success, it effectively united the nation. We saw incredible pictures there. But can this really fight, let's say, racism and Islamophobia in the country?
Well, I don't know. I can't give you the answer that will. But it's not. It's better like this than the contrary. You know, you saw in the images after the victory, after the semi-final, that France wants to have a moment of proud together. And this has been realized. If it will last, I don't know. But it shows a potential of unity in this country with what is incredible. Nobody believed it. In the beginning of the World Cup, nobody believed really in this team. Now, France is overwhelmed by the creativity, by the success of this team, and they are all proud. We are all proud, you know. They are all world champion, and this can be a good step. It will last, I don't know, but it's a good moment for the French. It's a good moment for the French.
Indeed, it is an incredible moment, really deafening celebrations there, amazing images. But, you know, if we just look back just 2 decades ago, we had players like Zinedine Zidane, Thierry Henry, Marcel Desailly. I mean, again, we bring up the issue of diversity. These were stars back then, but it didn't stop divisive rhetoric in the country, did it?
No, it didn't. And I you know, not one element or not one moment can solve the problem. No, the situation is, will the government, will the society take the new opportunity to go forward to make France better. I think with this success, they have a chance to make France better. It's not sure. I wouldn't, it's not a bet. It's so that the French president, the French government, but also the French parties saw that in this, this country, this society has a need to come together. And this now, the politician and the society must find the solution. And nobody knows at the beginning of the summer how it will end. But I think that because we had the example of 20 years ago, where nothing happened after, that now the French can take moment from this situation to bring forward more unity in the country.
More on that point. You bring a very good point. So there is a lot of goodwill right now because of this victory. So, okay, what can the government do to make good use of the positive spirit right now in the country?
Well, I think one of the big things is that some of the players came from the suburbs where there's a lot of difficulties. And the government has to put forward a plan, towards the suburbs. So I think that the government can today really raise the problem of inequality, of social inequality, of racial inequality in the suburbs, in the country. And with this energy, they can really make the difference with their plan to create new feelings, new opportunities in the suburbs.
All right. Thank you very much. Daniel Cohn-Bendit, former MEP and author there. Thank you. And we have a lot more coming your way. More on the top stories, including the Russian view on that controversial meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Plus, we have French unions meeting Emmanuel Macron. But can they make a mark as they talk about strikes and reform? And how sprinter Usain Bolt could actually be turning his hand to another sport. We'll tell you what he's considering doing next. But first, we'll leave you with no comment from today from Croatia, where the World Cup's runners-up, they had a hero's welcome of their own when they returned home. Watching Good Morning Europe, your top stories, good start or a disgrace. Donald Trump draws sharp rebuke back home after chummy summit with Vladimir Putin, while Russians are pleased. Caving in, Theresa May is accused of bowing to hardline Brexiteers after agreeing to changes in the key customs bill to get it through Parliament. Heroes welcome. The French team arrive home to wild cheers and street celebrations after bringing World Cup glory to France. Now, yesterday's press conference between the U.S. and Russian presidents could be described as unusual, at the least. And both Europe and Washington have been scathing in their reactions to the Helsinki talks. Donald Trump urged that, quote, diplomacy and engagement are preferable to conflict and hostility, end quote. Well, it sounds normal enough so far, but what came next wasn't. Trump went on to make the highly undiplomatic move of dismissing the findings of his own intelligence agencies, choosing instead to publicly accept his counterpart Vladimir Putin's denials of Russian involvement in the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign. Now, former CIA Director John Brennan labeled the comment, quote, nothing short of treasonous. But what's been the reaction in Russia? NBC News' chief foreign correspondent Richard Engels sent this report from Moscow.
Here in Moscow, there was always an expectation that a summit between Presidents Putin and Trump would go well. Many here were celebrating when Trump got elected. They thought because he's a businessman, because he's wealthy, because he's almost an American oligarch, that he and Putin would get along well, that they would have an affinity for each other. They both seem to respect power and like people who like to use it. But after this summit in Finland, there was even shock here that Russia got as much as it got. There were Russians who were saying, did President Trump really just take the Kremlin side over the side of the FBI and American intelligence agencies? To quote the Russian foreign minister, he called the meeting fabulous, better than super. This is not a man who's normally prone to hyperbole. Russian media pouring praise on this meeting. And for Vladimir Putin himself, this was more than just a good meeting. It was a moment. As a KGB officer, he watched the collapse of the Soviet Union and has been waiting for Russia to make a comeback ever since. Many here in Moscow believe that time has now come. Richard Engel, NBC News for Euro.
Well, 4 years ago today, 298 people lost their lives after the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine. Until today, families of the victims are still seeking justice. Alex and the Cube team have been following this story. Alex.
We have, Tessa. 4 years ago today. Let's just start on this image here. This is a wheat field in eastern Ukraine. And this patch here is where one of the 298 people fell from MH17. This, the outline of their body, that flag marking where they were found. Now, this image, one of the most powerful ones that Jerome Cessini for Time magazine summed up, I suppose, one of the few we can show you because of the graphic nature of what happened here. It was 4 years ago today that in the Donetsk region of Ukraine, this passenger airliner operated by Malaysian Airlines was shot down, carrying a majority Dutch passengers, but also Australians. This, a tweet here from Australian police, saying, calling for efforts to achieve justice for the victims and the loved ones are continuing. Now, there's long been the accusation against Russian-backed forces that they were the ones who fired this missile against the aircraft. And an investigation from Dutch investigators this year pointed the finger at Russian-backed. Well, it said that the missile was launched from Russian-controlled territory controlled by Russian-backed separatists, and that the missile used itself was a Russian-made missile, a Buk from a Buk missile launcher. So in the political discussion going globally, there were the fingers pointing at Russia. There was a statement from the G7 saying that evidence of Russia's involvement in the conflict in eastern Ukraine, and therefore indirectly or perhaps otherwise in this particular incident, was alarming and shocking. A strong statement from the G7 just days before this anniversary. Well, yesterday, the day before the anniversary, the President of America, a leading figure in the G7, had the chance to raise this issue with Vladimir Putin, to raise it with the Russians and to do so on the world stage. And this is the meeting that the world got. Was there a meeting, a mention of Ukraine? Was there a mention of Donetsk? Was there a mention of MH17? There was none. In fact, Donald Trump, in the lead-up to the meeting, had mentioned that one of the reasons, the key reasons for poor relations between the two countries was American foolishness. Now, that has certainly been disputed by a huge number of people on social media. Lottie Lecht, a European human rights advocate, saying that actually, no, one of the key reasons why there is poor relations between America and Russia is because 298 people were shot down over eastern Ukraine from Russian-backed separatist territory with a Russian-made missile. Other people like Robbie here from the Netherlands says he's appalled. He doesn't know how a leader from a Western country sits, laughs, and shakes hands with basically saying that Donald Trump is sitting there laughing, shaking hands with Vladimir Putin when actually the Russians bear responsibility. Keir Nagel, as I say, there were a number of Australians on the aircraft as well. He is an Australian social media user saying it's disgusting that 4 years after Russia shot down and then covered up, his words there, the MH17, the president feels fit to appease that country in perhaps the most disgraceful press conference in modern times. Perhaps the key thing to remember in all this is 4 years on, there is no justice for the families. No one has been held accountable, and that is despite evidence from investigators pointing the fingers towards Russian-backed separatists. Tessa.
All right, thank you for that story, Alex, and the Cube team. Thanks. Now, amid the euphoria of France's World Cup victory, President Macron will see union and employers' leaders in Paris today for the first such meeting since his election last year. The spring and summer so far have seen a wave of rail strikes, while the president's popularity has slumped amid increasing unease over his style. Well, the list of controversial reforms is long, so could a summer of celebration give way to an autumn of discontent? Well, here in the studio is our correspondent, Alistair Sanford. Alistair, I think what we want to know is how important is this meeting? I mean, Macron and the unions have been at loggerheads for some time now.
Yeah, well, Tessa, there'll never be a better moment to improve French industrial relations. I mean, the country is swept away by this World Cup victory at the moment. A whole hour-long main TV news programme last night was devoted just to those scenes of jubilation as the team returned. Up to now, as Team Macron has ploughed ahead with its reforms, unions and employers, to a certain extent, have felt very much left on the substitutes bench. Macron's predecessors, Sarkozy and Hollande, they made a point of meeting employers and unions, not so also Macron. This is the first such gathering of its type since he took office, and that's over a year ago now. The unions feel that Macron's been using his large parliamentary majority as a mandate to justify keeping them at arm's length. So labour reforms and rail reforms have gone through Parliament. Both sides are playing down the importance of this meeting. It's only due to last some 2 hours, but the unions do want a new approach here. They're encouraged so far by what President Macron said last week before the two houses of Parliament, where he said he wanted to include these organisations to draw up a new social contract for France.
I mean, so far it seems that Macron has been getting what he wanted in terms of reforms. After a meeting such as this, what do you think we can look forward to down the road?
Yes, he has got what he wanted so far. That said, of course, we've had that wave of rail strikes this spring and summer. And some of those are set to continue, although by and large they're kind of petering out. The movement is seen as having lost its momentum. However, there are big projects coming up on the horizon, reforms of social security, tackling poverty, work contracts, pensions, healthcare. These are big things that have really damaged many previous French presidents and governments. Many of them have floundered in trying to reform areas like this. Macron's under pressure to reduce France's huge public spending. He's tried to get ahead of the game, already getting going, putting social security reforms before Parliament. But the danger is, of course, that he may get people's backs up, and that may lead to protests, more protests on the streets. Also, his style has grated. There are increasing accusations that he's arrogant and aloof and almost monarchic. The unions are very wary of all this. They want Macron to engage with them, but they're wary that he may just pay lip service and carry on with those reforms anyway. For the unions, I think they're happy that this meeting is just taking place.
Indeed, it's interesting to watch and see the two sides actually in the same place together. Thank you for that, Alistair Sanford. Thanks. And still to come for you on the program, how a new market of some 600 million people could transform Europe's economy. We'll be back after a short break. You're watching Good Morning Europe. Our top story, President Trump is facing furious criticism after suggesting he trusts Russian President Vladimir Putin over his own intelligence services following a historic summit in Helsinki yesterday. Well, unpatriotic and a disgrace. Those are some of the words that his allies are using to describe that meeting in Helsinki. Alex has been following all that reaction for you.
I have, Tessa. Just a week ago, Paul Ryan, the most senior Republican in Congress, said that people shouldn't criticise Donald Trump when he's on overseas diplomatic missions. Well, after the meeting with Vladimir Putin yesterday, this is what Paul Ryan had to say. There is no moral equivalence between the United States and Russia, which remains hostile to our most basic values and ideals. And at the very top, the president must appreciate Russia is not our ally. So seemingly going in for President Trump's warm words and willingness, it would appear from that press conference, to accept Vladimir Putin's denial about Russian interference in the election over and above warnings from the American intelligence community. Let's just bring up John McCain, he's become a long-time Trump critic, but a Republican again. This criticism coming from within the Republican Party. John McCain calling this one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president in memory. Incredibly strong words. Here in Europe, we had some strong words as well. Carl Bildt, a leading figure of European foreign policy, pointing out that Donald Trump did not mention the key issues. He didn't hold Vladimir Putin to account on Ukraine. As he says here, any mention of that? Nada, null, zero, nothing. The idea the president was not confronting President Putin about these concerns. Now, Donald Trump himself, after the meeting, tweeted a defense, you could say, of his position, saying that, as I've said many times, I have great confidence and respect for my intelligence community, but perhaps the president here saying what I was trying to do was improve relations between the two most powerful nations. What do you think? You can let us know your thoughts using #TheCube.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. Now, protests have taken place outside of Madrid as the Spanish government announced plans to remove the remains of dictator General Franco from a state-funded crypt. While brandishing fascist salutes, protesters rallied against new Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's plans to convert the site into a memorial to victims of fascism. 80 years after the end of the Spanish Civil War and 40 years after Franco's death, the monument has become a shrine for the far right. And joining us live from Madrid is journalist James Badcock. James, thank you very much for joining us today. Can you tell us, to put it into context, how strong is the opposition to this?
I think active opposition to digging up Franco is not particularly large, although it's obviously very shocking in the 21st century Spain to see people doing fascist salutes. But there aren't many. I mean, there were a few hundreds or perhaps a few thousand, depending on which source you trust there, at the Valley of the Fallen on Sunday, protesting, saying that, Franco should not be dug up in what they called Christian Spain, the Spain of God. There's not a lot of active opposition. Every year, there are tiny demonstrations in favor of Franco on the day of his death, but it's fairly marginal. Spain doesn't have a huge far-right scene. But what there is a lot of misgivings among the population. This is something Pedro Sanchez has said he wants to do quickly, but a poll this weekend said that Spain is more or less divided down the middle on whether it's actually a good idea. I don't think they're divided down the middle on whether Franco is great or not. Most people would say that the dictatorship was bad, but we're looking at about 40% each way saying it's a good idea.
James, I just want to bring this question in. We don't have much time, but it's not just about moving this tomb. I mean, can you bring us the bigger political context to what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, we have a government, a socialist government who took over, very recently. It's got a small minority. It can't really legislate. And I think this is one of the sort of statements Pedro Sanchez wants to make before probably early elections next year or early 2020. It will be a big move to dig up the dictator from his own tomb, built to, as it were, his own glory, just outside Madrid.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Journalist James Badcock there live from Madrid. Thanks. Now, while U.S. President Donald Trump is unleashing tit-for-tat trade tariffs against the EU and China, some countries are only too happy to fill the gap. EU leaders are in Tokyo today to seal a major free trade deal with the Japanese, which could spell a major boost to both economies. Euronews' Sasha Vakulina has more.
After 4 years of negotiations, the European Union and Japan are signing the free trade agreement on Tuesday in Tokyo. The deal paves the way for trading in goods without tariff barriers. European Council President Donald Tusk and European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker are meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Abe amid the rising trade tensions. Japan is the EU's second biggest trading partner in Asia and the sixth most important trading partner worldwide. The Union is already exporting there over 58 billion euros in goods and over 28 billion in services. More than 600,000 jobs in the EU are tied to exports to Japan. The free trade agreement will remove almost all custom duties, which sum up to 1 billion euros annually. And according to the EU, every billion in EU exports supports 14,000 jobs in Europe. Two of the most important sectors are Japanese cars and, for Europe, EU farming goods into Japan, such as meat, wine and cheese. Sasha Vakulina, Euronews.
And still to come on the program, world record holder Usain Bolt might have retired from sprinting, but we'll find out what sport he's trying out next. That's after a short break. Welcome back. You're watching Good Morning Europe. Now, our next story, an unexpected sports star. He's thinking of changing careers. Alex has this story for you. Alex?
You see, some people, you think they've achieved all they are going to, and then eight gold medals, right? World's fastest man. But that's not enough for Usain Bolt. No, he's got a new chapter in mind. This is the picture from Usain Bolt at the World Cup. He's clearly a football fan. Here he is, the world's fastest man, 8-time Olympic gold medalist, enjoying himself in Russia, loving the football. Well, There is now talk that he is considering a football career of his own, transferring to an Australian side, who in a statement this morning, the Gold Coast Mariners, have said that, yes, discussions are ongoing between Usain Bolt and his management team and the club about a trial period with them. So Usain Bolt could be from the running track to the pitch soon. That's divided opinion online. Some people saying that they can't really see the point at parachuting celebrities in, as Guy Mann says here. And other people saying, like Carl saying, for example, why not spend the money on developing grassroots and other players? But the reality is Usain Bolt, clearly an incredible athlete, now looking for a new chapter in his career. A lot of other people are very excited. What do you think? You can let us know your thoughts using #TheCube.
Well, he shows it's never too late to change careers.
Very true.
Thanks for that, Alex and the Cube team. And thank you for joining us on Good Morning Europe. And do stay with Euronews for all of your top stories. And we leave you with today's No Comment from Paris, where thousands of people cheered on the World Cup winners as they paraded through the streets before receiving France's highest award, the Légion d'honneur.